few years later, I met my wife, Joni, and we've been partners ever since. And together, we've accomplished quite a bit, and we've had a pretty nice growth curve, you know, that's gone up pretty nicely. About 5 years ago, our son joined us as general manager, and since that time, we've had a growth curve that kind of goes like this. It's been a lot of change. Of course, all of us have gone through a lot of change in the last year or two. The question that remains is, will we embrace that change into the future, or is that change going to leave us behind? I get pretty far off in the weeds when I talk, so if you guys follow along with me, I'm going to keep it really short. But if I see you nod off, it might take me an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to go through this material. So bear with me, even out through the weeds. So all of you have probably heard the story about the frog and hot water. If you put a frog in a kettle of boiling water, the frog jumps out. But if you put a frog in a kettle of warm water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog will not be aware of the changes in its environment until it's too late. Will you and I be aware of the changes in our environment? A few weeks ago, the ex-governor of New York State resigned amidst sexual scandal, and he said, "In my mind, I never crossed the line, but the line had moved." Well, of course the line moved. The line moves every day, and the line moves in every aspect of our lives, in our personal lives, in our business lives. It certainly moves where our lives intersect with technology. In fact, the line probably represents change itself. And if you don't know where the line is, you have to do something to end your career. I think Andrew might have ended his personal life too. So most of us here make an appointment once a year for a physical exam. Even if we feel perfectly fine, we go to a doctor's and we have our core values checked out. We have them check our blood pressure and our pulse, our cholesterol levels, to make sure that we're performing up to our expectations. And if there's a problem, we have the opportunity to make adjustments to get back to peak performance. But how many of us take time annually to perform a self-evaluation? I'm talking about an identity checkup, where we sit down and honestly look at ourselves and say, am I the person that I think I am? Am I the person that I want to be? Am I the person that I need to be successful moving into the future? So instead of checking our blood pressure and our pulse and our cholesterol levels, we check things like our learning levels, our innovation levels, our productivity levels. So let's go through this. We'll start with our learning levels. Most of us here have a diploma, whether it's from high school or college or maybe even an advanced degree. And at the time that we were preparing to get that diploma, we were learning a lot. We were working really hard to learn. But if it's been 5, 10, 20, or maybe more years since we got that diploma, we may not have been focused on learning as much as we were prior to that time. And a lot of things have changed, and we might not be keeping up. For example, we all know today that 10% of the population is LGBT. Of course, it always was. We just weren't very accepting of that population. But if you're not accepting of that population today, you're running a risk of missing out on 10% of your customer base, 10% of the workforce, and the opportunity to get to know and learn from some really great people. So what else has changed? We talked about some of this morning. How about hiring people? Has that changed? 20 years ago, I could put an ad in the paper that said wanted auto parts counter man. We didn't consider women at the time. $10 an hour, and my phone would ring off the hook. How successful would that ad be today? It wouldn't be at all. Today, if we want to attract the best people, we need to offer a lot more. We need to offer substantial careers. We need to offer flexible, comfortable environments. We need to offer flexible hours that accommodate a person's personal life. We're going to need to offer a 401k, an environment where people's ideas and opinions are valued. And if we're going to retain the best people, it's the same thing. We need to make sure that we respect people and offer them a lot more than they expected 20 years ago. But let's move on. Let me not move on for a second. So how can we retain being lifelong learners? Well, I would recommend that everybody reads a book at least once a month. I'm certainly not going to recommend that you tune into network news. I would recommend you spend $1 a week and get the Wall Street Journal online. In my opinion, the absolute best mix of liberal and conservative news, opinion, and lifestyle. I certainly would recommend that you come to shows like this one, meet the vendors that are here, see what's new in the industry, and more than anything, I would recommend that you meet your fellow recyclers, talk to them, visit their facilities, see what they're doing to solve the problems that are baffling you. Oftentimes, it's easier to copy and improve than it is to innovate for yourself. But let's move on to innovation levels, because we know it's important to innovate. If you're going to be successful in business, you have to be an innovator, and all our business heroes have been innovators. Henry Ford, Jeff Bezos, the list goes on and on. Innovate or die, and you can't innovate when you're afraid of the future or something new. So we know we need to innovate, but sometimes we're still hesitant to do it. We don't innovate as much as we should, and I think it's because we're afraid of failure. Even a really, really innovative person like Bill Gates fails more than he succeeds. And when you innovate, you're putting your ideas out to the public, and what if they're wrong? Who likes to be wrong here? Nobody likes to be wrong. It's really, really uncomfortable. But we still have to innovate and not be afraid to be wrong. And when we realize we're wrong, we have to admit it. The good thing about admitting you're wrong is that as soon as you do it, you're less wrong than you were just a minute before. It's okay to innovate and be wrong and admit it. And innovation is not a set it and forget it. It changes all the time. Does anybody remember the BlackBerry? It was the first personal assistant cell phone. It was a tremendous innovation. It was also a $25 billion company 15 years ago. Who's using a BlackBerry today? Nobody. He was a great innovator, but he had idea fixation. When the touchscreen came out, he couldn't believe that his keypad wasn't better. And he doubled down on the BlackBerry, and he doubled it right down to bankruptcy. How about Blockbuster Video? $20 billion company. It's just a memory now. They had a great innovation, but it changed, and he wasn't ready to change with it. When we innovate, we have to be able to pivot and move on. Productivity levels. Let's take a look at those. Everybody likes to think they're productive. But are we? I hear a lot of talk about time management. That kind of baffles me. If you look it up in Webster's, time is defined as a non-spatial continuum. Think about that for a second. A non-spatial continuum. That's really hard to manage. But what we can manage is our attention. And we should put most of our attention on the important things first. I'm going to give you a hint here. It's not Facebook. Give most of your attention to the important things first, and don't worry about how much time it takes, because it's important. You can't put it in a time box. It's important. When Martin Luther King Jr. was asked to speak at the March on Washington, he sat down and wrote the speech 3 weeks early, because he was a procrastinator. He liked to do things early. But he put all his attention on it. And a week went by, and he was still thinking about this speech and making changes. Another week went by, he's still making changes. He's in Washington, D.C., he's standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. He's looking at 250,000 people on the Capitol Mall, and he's still thinking about changing his speech. And as he stood up, all this attention coalesced into 4 words that he had never considered. And he stood up and he said, "I have a dream." And the rest is history. One of the greatest speeches of the 20th century. He knew it was important, and he devoted all his attention to it. Not a set period of time, his attention. Give your attention to the most important things first, and the rest of the things will figure out by themselves. I'm not suggesting you procrastinate. There's a big difference. We all have things that we know we need to do. We know how to do them, and we should do them, and we don't because they're distasteful. And it might be firing a toxic employee. It could be calling an angry customer. It could be apologizing because we were rude to somebody. But we put that off, and at the end of the week, we've got 10 of them, and they're consuming all our attention, and now we don't have attention for the important things. Don't procrastinate. Focus your attention on the important things first. The list of self-evaluation could go on and on. Am I able to accept criticism, or do I miss out on the ideas of my coworkers because they're afraid to bring them up to me because I can't take criticism? Am I being kind? Am I being compassionate? The list could go on and on. But I promise you guys that if you paid attention, I'd keep it really short, and you've lived up to your part of that agreement, and I'm still kind of mumbling on. So I'm going to finish up. The story about the frog, that's not true. That's an old fable. If you put a frog in a tub of warm water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog will be aware of the change in its environment, and it'll take the correct action. It'll jump out. Will you and I be aware of the changes in our environment? Will we embrace change in the future? We don't know because the future isn't here yet. And the future isn't here yet because you and I haven't written it. But make no mistake, you and I will write our own future. Let's write it together. Let's make it a future that embraces change, a future where we practice good self-evaluation so we're the best version of ourselves. Let's make it kind, compassionate, inclusive, and let's make it successful for all of us. Thank you.